Welcome back to Music is Just a Word. Last episode, I discussed how our efforts must ultimately be about the people and serving the people. But if we try to make things all about the people in too direct of a way, it's not always in the best interest of the people. If you try to make sure your music is all about the people, for example, by saying that anyone can participate on any instrument at any time, this is one of those cases where in making it all about the people too directly, you can make choices that are not good for the music, and so at the end of the day are not good choices for the people. Freedom of artistic expression is an important need for any person, but a person who's fully taking advantage of every inch of this freedom might or might not be acting in the best interest of the art form, and by extension, the best interest of the people. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about musical freedoms versus musical responsibilities and the connected issue of the individual versus the collective. Also, I'm still pushing the theme that this is all completely subjective. To deny someone the freedom of musical expression can seem like a pretty serious thing, just as serious as denying someone any form of expression. So, when someone at a jam needs to be told to stop playing, people just aren't very good at doing it. And the ways people do find to tell each other to stop playing end up being along the lines of turned backs and maybe a bit stiffer of a greeting. People will use body language to tell each other when their contributions are unwelcome. And body language is really imprecise and it can't even always happen at the right time. Somebody getting punished by means of body language might have made the infraction minutes or hours ago. But for all that it would be so much better to just have a word or a conversation about it, most of us can't manage to do it because to directly ask someone to stop playing their music or to change what they're doing, this looks an awful lot like a denial of musical freedom of expression. So I think a lot of jams never get past the point where people can tell each other to stop playing music or to play differently and not have it become a scandal. Scandalicious! And it's easy for things to get political and scandalous, especially if you haven't designated something of a full-time air traffic controller for the music. Some trusted person that people are expecting the directions to come from. If you don't have this, any efforts to moderate who gets to play and when might come across as sporadic or volunteer-based or arbitrary or socially motivated, and in general, something more fitting in with the interpersonal relationship than with the relationship between the people and the music. And when you don't have pre-established directorship, it's easy enough for things to come across this way because there are definitely enough times when people are trying to level up in their own status as musical mediators at the expense of the musical contributors. So I would say best case scenario, you would have a lineup or a rotation of people who get total subjective control over the music, and it's unambiguous. And if it's your turn to moderate who gets to play and who doesn't get to play, then you're welcome to do so. And if it's not your turn, then you're not welcome to do so. And as much as people might not like being told to stop playing, I guarantee that when it gets to be their turn to direct, they will love having that privilege to tell people to stop playing or change what they're playing. They might even love it so much that they'll enthusiastically accept when somebody else tells them to stop playing when it's that person's turn. I've sure been saying the people a lot in these last couple episodes, and I'll say it once more here. I think any real gathering of the people should involve music that everybody gets to take a turn in controlling. Everybody who wants to, that is. And if everyone who wants to has access to the controls for a term and gets to take their turn at the helm, well, this should entail complete and total free reign, the likes of which you see with dictatorships. Imagine one of the workshop stages that you see at a music festival. Imagine having a pool of musicians that play for the whole event, and then you have a lineup of conductors made up of not only musicians, but also general audience members, and perhaps non-musical staff as well, promoters and organizers, hospitality, maybe volunteers too. You could have some basic training available if necessary regarding what kinds of commands the musicians are going to be able to respond to. But because this whole system is kind of an acknowledgement and an uplifting of the total subjectivity of all music, I think an important part of this involves responding musically to a wide variety of conducting styles. Some conductors might just be able to request songs. Other conductors might get more involved and might have an idea of what exact musical behaviors they want out of certain players. One of my main focuses in the first few episodes of this series was how well adapted language is for making more language. So when people are trying to plan for music, when people are trying to design music, the language involved in this can just end up triggering more language. And before you know it, it's become all about the talk. And the talk might be about music, but the music doesn't always even arrive. It's just talk leading to more talk, leading to more talk. And then the project falls apart. So the idea with this conductor system is that there is a single person at the whole musical gathering that is privileged to speak influentially about music. And whatever words the conductor uses to express their wishes, people are responding with music, not responding with words, not having back and forth dialogue about the music. Whether the conductor uses proper musical terminology or whether they have a subjective and personal way of phrasing things, people should be eager to turn this person's wishes into music. I think one of the reasons language is able to replicate so abundantly, thanks to music, is that there are so many different angles by which people can be influential over music, involving so many different roles and specializations. One person might take charge on promotional or monetary grounds. One person might take charge on technical grounds for the sake of amplification or recording. Someone might take an opportunity to become influential suddenly from an educational point of view. Or someone could suddenly take charge from a purely musical point of view and start playing a very dominant instrument that nobody can help but to follow. Any number of people could become a musical influencer at any time based on circumstances and specialties and making a living. And these all overlap in messy and unpredictable ways. Why not just acknowledge the total subjectivity of all of it and try to unify all these different contexts of influence and have a single person in supreme control for a predetermined amount of time? If there's going to be ciphering, why not cipher the director, cipher around at the very top level of music design? If you frequent jams, especially the open kinds of jams, you'll know that certain combinations of player and instrument amount to the music getting derailed. Certain combinations of player and instrument result in people walking out of the building. And I'm actually going to suggest we scrutinize the instruments on this issue as much as the players. Many instruments are designed or evolved to give a single individual musical control potentially over thousands of people. Think of the signals a trumpeter or bugler gives to the entire military base. Or think of how the timbales and cowbells provide direction and coordination to the entire salsa band or even the whole parade. Lots of musical instruments seem to be designed to completely take over a certain niche, whether it's harmonic or melodic or rhythmic or what have you, and to completely dominate their jurisdiction of the soundscape. And even for instruments that can't naturally cut through a whole room of musicians, with the help of amplification, any instrument can pose a problem. So where music seems to suffer is when the spirit of full participation meets musical instruments that are designed to monopolize music. And so when just anyone has access at any time to pick up a potentially very dominant instrument, the music can suffer, and you can have no one whose job it is to suggest a less dominant instrument to the participant. You can have a room full of people that are all too polite to try to curb the cacophony, because nobody wants to deny a person their freedom of musical expression. Actually, a lot of our culture's music systems seem to be designed or evolved to help people avoid telling each other when contributions are unwelcome. The stage is a clear and physical boundary, and if you're not within that boundary, you're pretty decisively not part of the music, except for by dancing and listening and applauding. As the physical stage designates a limited space from which people can play music, the playing of canned music over the speakers can do the same thing with time. Throwing on canned music for some of the night can set out concise, limited amounts of time in which to play live music. Even as simple a thing as having a sign-up sheet indicates to people that they have a designated time to play instead of just spending the night playing. With the help of stages, canned music, and sign-up sheets, a host doesn't have to tell nearly as many people to stop playing. The job of telling people to stop playing is already complete in the presence of these tools, which enables the host to tell people when it's time for them to play, along with an underlying assumption that they won't be playing the rest of the time. I think it's within our reach to reverse this. I think we could make it so that people are welcome to play unless otherwise stated. But to achieve this, we need to combat the stigmatism and the taboo of telling people to stop playing or to change what they're playing. And to achieve that, as I say, we need to accept and embrace the total subjectivity of all music. What are some more examples of this subjective decision-making that would have to be made by a musical dictator? Well, again, everything needs its time, but you can't have everything all at once. So you need to decide, when is it time to hear voices? When is it time to hear instruments? And within that, when is it just time to hear drums versus when is it time to hear harmonic and melodic instruments? When is the time for amplification? When is the time for acoustic instruments? When is it time for the instruments to be playing modestly and somewhat in the background, to accompany a singer, for example, versus when is it time for an instrumentalist to take the spotlight? When is it time for the more everyday instruments versus when is it time to hear from the more unique or character instruments or traditional instruments? It can't always be the time for a bunch of brass instrument solos or harmonica solos, for example, or a bunch of weird synth sounds. But if music is anything and everything, then these things have to have their time at some point. When is it time for a bunch of... When is it time for a bunch of When is it time to hear a bunch of hand percussion, tambourines and shakers? Again, not every musical moment is going to be right for these things, but they do need their time to shine. And just when this gets to happen, I would say, isn't really a choice that can be made communally. There'll be some people that can't stand some of these musical elements, and for others, it'll make their whole night. And for some people, just having access to try some of these elements for themselves might end up partially derailing the music, but again, it might make their whole night. So there could be times when somebody's playing experience is more important, at least for a few moments, than the listening experience of the other people. Or even when a seasoned musician starts playing for theirself and wandering around and losing the form and or perhaps starting to repeat something for practice purposes, and all things non-conducive to a gathering of musicians. I'd say the gathering factor and the cohesion factor are more important, but it's not like there's zero importance in having an enthusiastic person have the freedom to experiment and to explore and to make a racket. You just have to weigh those importances. You have to weigh the needs of the many versus the needs of the few, and the importance of the individual versus the importance of the collective. And maybe the way I'm stating it makes it seem like this is all a no-brainer and you should have no trouble silencing someone, but there can arise serious ambiguity. Maybe a person who's playing non-cohesively is the one buying all the drinks. Or maybe they're just very spirited and enthusiastic and adding a lot of social value to the occasion. And I'd say these things are important musical contributions in their own kind of indirect ways. There are times when a person will start making novel musical use of a new tool. Someone might start singing or announcing things using a vocal effect on the DJ equipment. Or maybe someone will start flashing the pyrotechnic equipment in rhythm with the music. These kinds of things make sudden, striking additions to the music which really can't pass as anything other than a solo. And whether or not it's the appropriate time for that kind of solo isn't typically a decision made by anyone other than the opportunist theirself. You can't always predict moments like these, because, well, why shouldn't people experiment with new instruments and put novel tools towards musical use? But I would just say that it's helpful probably to have someone presiding over the situation, somebody acting as the dictator, ideally for a limited time term, and basically just acting as a moderator for when people do make these kinds of experiments. I think the dictator system could really help in situations like these, just to make sure that leadership isn't always only coming from the newest or loudest instrument. I'm sure some listeners are wondering, well, what about just having a series of people just lead songs as performers in the completely normal way? Well, my idea that I'm pushing about musical dictatorships is, in effect, mostly separate from musical performance. We would have to experimentally confirm this, but I think all the benefits of the dictatorship system basically require the dictator to be a non-performer and to be dictating from the position of, say, a stage manager or a conductor or even a monitor tech. And I'm planning to talk about the importance of separating leadership from performance in an upcoming episode. But for now, I'll just say that the whole concept of having a designated person to make these top-level music decisions will all go right to crap if it's just a platform for people to clear the way for their own musical expression. Like if people are using their directorships just to establish themselves as performers. I think you need someone to decide what sounds are to belong to the music. And while this person is in charge, they need to be making these decisions full-time for the duration of their term. I think this is needed to make sure that people don't take it personally when they get told to stop playing. You just need someone whose job it is, not a chaotic flow of potentially socially motivated volunteer directors. Now, whether or not it's always going to be possible to maintain a separation between performer and leader/dictator, I'm not entirely sure, because I think our present music culture is built on a long tradition of people leading music by playing music, especially vocals. But uncertain as I am on this issue, I'm very much looking forward to any opportunities to experiment. I think jams and improvised music could really skyrocket if you just have someone to suggest some basic prohibitions and if you just have people that are okay with adhering to these. Designate a few minutes to take a break from rhythm or meter. Designate a few minutes for only rhythm and meter and take a break from harmony. This might be necessary if you're trying to get an electronic sound. Like if you're trying to get that mechanical, kind of Detroit-sounding house music style, or dubstep or whatever, it can be really unhelpful if somebody is playing in a key. For this kind of music to work, you have to obscure the key center and not have decipherable melodies and harmony, except maybe for some designated sections. Other times you need a prohibition for one contribution to even be heard. The strongest beatboxer can be washed out by even the most minimal drumming or DJing. Or if you're trying to feature synth basses, you might need the bass guitar player to take a break. But if no one's able to tell anyone to stop playing without it being received as a denial of musical freedom of expression or a denial of the right to participate, it can just never get off the ground that anyone can ever edit anything out of the music. So you get stages full of musicians who are both cramped for space and cramped for opportunities to make themselves heard. And this is kind of sad because I think the best musical interaction happens when there's only a couple or three people playing at a time. I actually find that when there's only two people playing, you really can't go wrong. No matter who it is, no matter what the style, no matter whether they're playing with tracks or not. And with 3 people, you almost can't go wrong. So I think it's important to get over that hurdle and just accept the fact that sometimes, for the sake of the music, you do have to limit people's freedoms of musical expression. In order that anyone else have the space and time to musically express themselves, a person with a loud amp, for example, might have to be subjected to limitations. Amps, by the way, are a bit of a divisive issue, I find, because in many musical gatherings, half of the musicians have to come through a common PA and have to have their volume levels moderated by a sound person, while the other half of people get control over their own sound source and can turn up as loud as they want. So I actually find this quite a divisive issue, a wedge issue, if you will. Pun intended. And for listeners not involved with music, the wedges are what we call the stage monitors, or the speakers that face back at the musicians. I think that in a proper musical dictatorship, whoever's in charge at a given moment should have control over all of the musicians' volumes, not just some of them. And if it seems unrealistic to hold musical gatherings and jams without the use of amps, I'd like to suggest borrowing a technique from DJs and make headphone monitoring available. With this technique, a musician can always have access to the monitoring of their own channel, and furthermore, different musicians can listen to each other's feed over the headphones. With today's technology, you can dial this up using a cell phone. Just imagine being part of a team of musicians that are preparing a groove or a passage of music to play in a few moments within the comfort and safety of their own headphone mix. Maybe there's another team playing right now over the speakers, and in 16 bars time, that group goes dark and begins preparing their next passage over the headphones while you guys go live over the speakers. It's tempting to think that if you got good enough at this technique, you might even be able to eliminate the need for rehearsal, and just have musicians rehearse on some dark part of the stage or behind a curtain within headphone groups. This is one of the many possibilities of how music might be coordinated under a series of dictatorships. Just how long should a musical dictatorship last? If a presidential term expires after 4 years, maybe a musical directorship should end after a week. Or in a more active, kind of fast-paced, live scenario, maybe 30 minutes is enough. Should be long enough that it's a proper platform for that subjective artistic expression in the unique medium that is directing live musicians. But also short enough that you can fit anyone who wants to direct on the list. If dictators are doing less and just being happy to preside while the musicians are doing their thing, this might be reason for longer dictatorships. And if dictators are more active, maybe to the point that their dictatorship is something of a performance, maybe this is a reason for a shorter length. Or maybe not. Optimal lengths of dictatorships might also depend on whether the music is to be all live or whether there's an element of recording or broadcast, and whether or not this involves some pre-planning or some rehearsal. If pre-planning and rehearsal are needed, I think it might be appropriate to have a dictator for the day. Whatever the duration, I think the important point is to pre-establish how long dictatorships last, and then to make sure that every dictator gets that fair share of time. The other key is to give people their full and equal dictatorial term, no matter what their ordinary role outside of the dictatorship system is. Like, no matter what kind of musical influences someone is accustomed to having over people, and whatever musical agendas or visions that person might hold, give them the same 30-minute term in that executive position of music decision-making, supposing that's the duration that you settle on. Somebody wants to hear a bunch of canned music? Just blast some drum and bass from some speakers? Give them their 30 minutes. Someone wants to play acoustic and sing some originals, or listen to other people's originals. Give them their 30 minutes. Someone wants to hear covers. Give them their 30 minutes. Someone wants to hear crisp, complicated, and intricate music from a very small pool of musicians. Give them their 30 minutes. Somebody wants to give everybody in the room an instrument, or play something really freeform, some abstract jazz or something. Give them their 30 minutes. Some bluegrass purist who can't stand the sound of a harmonica. Give him his 30-minute directorship. Some wannabe or groupie trying to get in the good books of a bluegrass purist by rejecting all the harmonica players. Give them their 30 minutes in the director's chair. If some random person comes in and is all yelling and looking for attention and full of grievances and trying to influence everyone, like a heckler, I'm thinking. Well, I think there's a lot of wisdom in trying to mitigate potential conflict by being receptive, and receiving the person, and trying to accommodate and to listen. Well, I think we can combine these themes with some of my themes in the podcast, and I think what you get in effect is a suggestion to take people who are out of line and move them up, move them all the way up, and give them an even unscheduled term as the dictator and see how they do. Someone's heckling that they want something out of the music, give them their 10 minutes as the dictator. The dictatorship system is kind of a catch-all solution for me to address my criticisms of our music culture. Mostly untested, I should admit, and it's also kind of jumping forward in my series because I'm far from finished voicing my criticisms, but I just wanted to jump ahead so that it's not another 5 episodes of voicing problems before I even mention a solution. Just how to conduct a series or rotation of dictatorships in this way is itself subjective, and doubtless I'm sure there's many more details that need to be worked out and scenarios that I can't anticipate. But in general, this dictatorship system is the best solution I can think of to a music culture and a jam culture that is stock full of conflicting, multi-directional music influence, where becoming an effective influencer of music often corresponds to personal gain. Kind of in a meritocracy sense. It takes a good leader to be a good follower, and it takes a good follower to be a good leader. With the dictatorship system, people should be able to get their fill of both leading and following. I think the chaos of a musical culture where everyone is trying to impose their designs and their plans and visions on everybody else all the time could be brought into a wonderful order, where any and every musical agenda and any attempts to influence the musical behaviors of someone else yields the same response. Hey, that's a great idea. When is your 30 minutes?